right? It's the entirety of lexical overwhelm. That if you can't agree on the definition of words, the argument about the words and what they then refer to just collapses in on itself and continuously just falls back to an argument about the definition of words.
Yes, this happens with, for example, freedom. There are lots of different ways of conceiving of freedom. Famously, freedom from and freedom to, right? Is freedom just being left alone, or is freedom being empowered to do things that you should be able to do? And then when you have people arguing about nationalised healthcare, one person says, to be free, you need to be healthy. Another person says, to be free, you need to spend your own money as you please and not be forced to fund other people's healthcare. Now, both of these people should be right. Absolutely, you're quite right. And that's why meta-ethics is quite important. A.J. Ayer pointed out in Language, Truth and Logic that the vast majority of ethical debate is not ethical debate. It's descriptive debate, it's factual debate. If you look at the so-called ethical debate around gun laws in America, for example, people are talking about statistics. They're saying X many people die per year. Oh, well, don't you know that more children are killed by swimming pools? Don't you know that, like, if we introduce, you know, if we ban certain types of weapons or blah blah blah, that this many less people will die. All these kind of things are just descriptive, factual statements that people like to dispute with each other, and that's why they like to say we have the facts on our side. But the actual ethical question that unveils it is hardly ever even reached. You know, and so most of the time people are actually arguing about that. I mean, the same thing with an abortion bill. You know, questions about biology. When does consciousness emerge? Can it survive on its own outside of the womb this week or this week? You know, this will it increase the number of women who die or decrease the number of women who die? But none of these are ethical questions. And people think they're having an ethical debate when they're actually just having a debate about facts that can be resolved in principle by scientific empirical inquiry. The ethical question is the more interesting one, that's often seen. And if people think that they agree with each other or understand each other in the same way on that ethical question, then you're in for a disaster.
What do you wish
if they don't?
Yeah, what do you wish that more people could realise when it comes to understanding ethics and consistency in their own lives? Is there something that a little red pill or a particular insight that you wish you could deposit into the mind of the populace that you think would make their lives a little bit more easy or their sense making a bit more simple?
I don't know about making their lives easier, but I just think that people should the extent to which emotions dominate thinking. And I think it's seen as a relative percentage of ethics just is the expression of emotion. This was something popularised by that same A.J. Ayer in a book that was so troubling to the philosophical consensus at the time, the story of maybe a dean of Baylor College or something, when a student came in, everybody understood that was working, they were so scared of the implications of it that he literally throws it out of the window because he doesn't want to talk about it. Ayer's talking about how the only things that can be meaningful are those that are analytically true and empirically verifiable. If the statement you're making isn't something you can, at least in principle, test empirically, or something that's just a tautology to its core, then what you're saying is literally meaningless. And people came to him and said, well, what about ethical statements? You can't prove these in principle and they're not tautological. And he said, well, the way that they're meaningful is that they are expressions of emotion. And it gives birth to this view called emotivism, which is really a philosophy of language more than a philosophy of ethics. It tries to describe what people mean when they say good or bad. And famously, he comes up with this analogy that saying murder is wrong is like saying do murder. Saying murder is, or saying give charity is good is like saying yay charity. It's just an expression of emotion. It's not even the same thing as saying I like charity or I don't like murder. Because those things can be true or false. They have proof. It could be true that it's just a psychological fact that I don't like murder. It means murder is wrong, that statement. It's just the expression of the emotion. To murder. And I think, even if you don't agree with him to that extent, as I more or less do, if you begin to recognise the extent to which emotions are dominating your ethical conduct, pay attention to what it feels like when you analyse something. I think it belongs in the same category as
this sort of suite of soup of some stimulus going on inside of you. What is it like to feel like something is wrong?
And we know that people seem to change what they rationally do based on how they're feeling. I mean, I don't know if you've come across terror management theory before. It surprised me if you haven't. The idea that all human beings are doing is trying to manage their fear of death. And that's what motivates all human activity. There's interesting studies, and some of them are more interesting than others. I mean, the first one, the most famous, was I think Arizona state judges, and they were being asked to recommend a bond for the solicitation of prostitution. And what the researchers did was they asked them to fill out just a form, and on half of the forms, they just mentioned death. They just put in a few questions about death. What do you think happens after death? Who do you think you will? That kind of stuff. Nothing too. And they found that the bond was set by the judges. I think the average bond for the culprit was less than $100, and for the ones who were reminded of their death, it was like $200 or $300.
What does that?
So the interpretation of the pterodactyl theory was that when we're reminded of our deaths, we need to temporarily more heavily reaffirm the sort of death-denying aspects of our culture. The reason that we do things, the reason we create art, the reason that we get out of bed, the reason that we have conversations like this is because in some way it's traceable back to trying to essentially deny our own death. Deny our own death. And this is essentially the idea. And so for judges, it might be something like by participating in the legal system, participating in something that's a bit beyond them, and therefore it exists outside of their own mortality. And so the thesis, this mortality salience hypothesis, as it's known, is that for a judge, if they're reminded of their own death, what they will temporarily be compelled to do is more partially reaffirm that thing that is the death-denying aspect of their daily life, in the legal system, so more part-time.
Right. Okay.
Now, that to me seems the explanation seems a little independent. I'm not sure about that, but it does seem strange that when you remind people of their own death, they will Christians, like Muslims will become more derogatory. People of different nationalities will sit further away. People will, when asked for pictures of currency, will draw physically larger. People's opinion on whether they prefer a picture of a forest or a picture of suburban neighbourhood will change on average. These things are extraordinary just from being reminded of your own death. Of course, the biggest manifestation of the denial of death would be religion, and that would also explain why religion deals a lot with death. If you remind people of their own death, they also become religious, which, by the way, is true of atheists as well. People who don't believe in God will still become more religious, even if they don't ultimately believe in God when reminded of their own.
Yeah, I've been thinking a good bit recently about how people do an awful lot, especially in the modern world, that is death denialism masquerading as something else. I think the productivity movement very much is that, trying to fit more into less time. If only I could get more life, more work, more output out of my 1 unit of days or whatever. I think that a good chunk of the health and fitness world, the longevity movement, all of that is absolutely death denialism. And you can see as well, nutrition, all of the arguments about is it better for me to be carnivore or vegan, should I go high carb or low carb, can I do intermittent fasting, should I be using ketones exogenously? Ultimately, the reason that I think these arguments are so vehement and passionate, especially when you think it's a diet, guys, right? It's a diet. It's like, I want to have aspartame, you want to have sugar. Like, how does my aspartame consumption impact your sugar consumption? But what it hits at, for a lot of people, is a certainty about I can project out how long I'm going to be able to live or die, and I'm going to be able to prepare myself as a person. And it's a clear conviction that approach, which derogates my approach implicitly, suggests to me you're going to die soon. And that causes me to be fucking terrifying. It's the same reason why people are so how long do you need to do? It's not VO2 max, it's resting heart rate, it's not galvanic skin temperature. We're not looking at that, we're looking at telomerase, all of the things, the entire field of health and fitness, which I'm a big part of, I think is a good chunk of it is death denialism, just masquerading as getting big biceps.
Yeah. So sometimes it is more obvious. I think we need more nihilist health influencers who will sort of say,
I need to.
when the question is asked, do you eat white bread or brown bread or whatever it is, they'll sort of begin with the question. It sort of depends on your views on the intrinsic value of life. Also, if you're a bit of a utilitarian, people often say that being unhealthy might be unethical because in a country with nationalised healthcare,
You're a burden.
you're a burden. But are you? I mean, who costs the taxpayer more? The person who eats a bunch of burgers and has a heart attack and dies instantly, or the person who lives into old age and therefore has some kind of long-term health problem like Alzheimer's or dementia?
I need to interject here. So you ring me probably 4 years ago. You ring me. I'm in the gym, and you say something like, "What are you doing?" I'm in the gym. What are you doing? Oh, just whatever. Catch up with you. I was like, "What's going on?" And you said, "I'm trying nihilism." And I said, "What do you mean?" And you went, "As a life philosophy, I'm trying nihilism." And I still don't know what it is. So how is your experiment to make nihilism great again going?
Well, I was getting a bit fed up with people saying, "Oh, you're an nihilist. Oh, you're an atheist." Well, they wouldn't say it in the sense of nihilism. They say, "Oh, you're an atheist." Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, there was a clip of Jordan Peterson on the Lex Friedman podcast, and he says, "Oh, you're secular, and you go to art galleries, yeah? Well, what makes you think you're secular?" And the head turn is real. He does that. I think I was like, what on earth are you talking about, man? Do you think you can't be an atheist and enjoy art? Now, I've tried my best to understand what he was getting at, and I think he was trying to basically say that in order to enjoy art, you need to have some kind of value, and in order to have any kind of surface level value, you can always ask, so why that question? Why do you value this? Why, the classics of why do you go to school to get a good grade? Well, you don't just want the grade. Why do you get the grade? You do it to get a good job, and so on and so forth. Happiness value. And so why do you value art? You value beauty. And Peterson's whole thing is that whatever's at the top of this value hierarchy is in his definition divine. He just defines it as such. And so he essentially said that, like, people claim that they are nihilists, but they don't live like that. I thought, well, what would it mean to really live like a nihilist? And I guess I tried to emphasize. But he's right to the extent that I think most people don't live like a nihilist.
What would the definition of living like a nihilist be?
I think it would just mean the rejection of any such thing as a non-contingent reason for action.
Be more accessible.
You would need to really think that there's no reason to do anything outside of essentially your crude preferences and biological drives.
Right.
And I think the reason why people think that nihilism is unlivable is because they have this image of somebody just immediately becoming a Stormantov type figure and just committing a murder or something. But they forget that these people still have their memory. They're going to be embedded in culture and upbringing. Their preferences are essentially still going to be aligned. I mean, Penn Jillette was once asked, if you're an atheist, why don't you kill and assault every person you want to? And he says, I do kill and assault everybody I want to, which is precisely nobody. And very clever, I guess, a bit of an applause. But I mean, the difficult question I think is what happens when somebody doesn't have that view, what happens when somebody does just disagree with you. But I don't know, it was kind of boring.
Just to interject there so you could see the meaning-making machine of society and cultural norms as being useful to constrain the behavior of those outlier people, the ones who would go out and commit the litany of mass murders. But
Yes.
Mum told me that I'm not supposed to squash bugs when I was 5 years old, and this is now carried on through. But yeah, for most people, we are the descendants of the people who avoided, at least for the most part, killing people that are close to us, and we feel a lot of the time like we're now close to each other.
Yes. I think that's probably true. The issue is the more that we try to explain away these mechanisms, we try to understand why in our evolutionary history we might have evolved certain moral taboos, this kind of stuff. It begins to essentially take the complete ethical force out of it, and that's what people think leads to nihilism. Once you have fully explained why something would be considered immoral, just on evolutionary grounds, you've essentially taken out the moral factor altogether, and you're just explaining it in terms of genetic preference.
Yeah, there's no more meaning. There's nothing. There's no additional fluff or feeling of anything. But this is, I've spent a lot of time over the last few years talking to evolutionary psychologists, evolutionary biologists, people that have looked at the evolution of culture as well from a mimetic standpoint too. And it does seem to me that culture is just like exclusively an adaptive response to coordination at large scale, and that all of the things that are in code.